The stars burned cold and distant outside the viewport of Sentinel Station, a massive ring of metal and light that hung in orbit around the planet. It was a beautiful world, covered in forests of silver trees and oceans of deep purple water. The people had lived there for over 10,000 years, building a civilization that stretched across dozens of star systems. They were proud, ancient, and powerful. They believed themselves to be the most advanced species in the known galaxy. And then the humans arrived. It had been only 200 years since humanity first left Earth and ventured into the stars. In that short time, they had spread across 100 worlds, built fleets of warships, and forced their way into the Galactic Alliance through sheer determination and stubborn refusal to be ignored. The older species looked down on them. They called humans primitive, violent, and short-lived. They said humans were like children playing with fire, too young to understand the dangers of the universe. But the humans did not care what the older species thought. They kept building, kept exploring, kept pushing forward. And when the Dominion began its war of conquest, threatening to destroy everything the Alliance had built, it was the humans who stood at the front lines and held back the darkness. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes was one of those humans. He was 34 years old, with dark hair that was starting to show hints of gray at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had served in the Alliance military for 15 years, fighting in a dozen campaigns against pirates, rebels, and His body carried the scars of those battles, lines of healed tissue that mapped his history in flesh. But the deepest scars were the ones no one could see. The ones carved into his heart by loss and loneliness and the endless weight of war. He stood now in the command center of Sentinel Station, watching the tactical display with tired eyes. Red dots moved across the holographic map, each one representing an enemy ship. There were hundreds of them, a massive fleet that was heading straight for. They had finally decided to strike at the heart of the Alliance, and Sentinel Station was all that stood in their way. "How long until they reach weapons range?" Daniel asked. Ensign Porter looked up from his console. He was young, barely 22, with a round face and nervous eyes. This was his first real battle, and Daniel could see the fear hiding behind his professional mask. 8 hours, sir. Maybe less if they increase speed." Daniel nodded slowly. 8 hours. That was not much time. The station's defenses were strong, but they were not designed to hold against a fleet this size. They needed reinforcements, but the nearest Alliance battle group was 3 days away. They were on their own. "Begin evacuation procedures," Daniel ordered. "All non-essential personnel and civilians are to board the transport ships immediately. I want those ships heading for the jump point within 2 hours." "Yes, sir," replied, his fingers moving across his console to relay the orders. Daniel turned away from the display and walked to the viewport. The stars stared back at him, cold and uncaring. He had spent so many years looking at those stars, dreaming of the adventures they promised. Now they just looked empty. Now they just reminded him of how small and alone he really was. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. He did not need to turn around to know who had entered. He could feel her presence like a change in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Commander Hayes." Her voice was like music, like the sound of bells ringing in a distant temple. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "I require a status report." Daniel turned to face High Counselor of the. She was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like mother-of-pearl and eyes that held the light of ancient stars. Her hair flowed down her back like liquid silver, and her robes were the deep purple of her world's oceans. She was over 3,000 years old, though she looked no older than a human woman in her prime. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched countless species crawl out of their birth worlds and reach for the stars. To her, humans were newcomers, infants taking their first stumbling steps into a universe they did not understand. And yet, despite all of that, Daniel had fallen in love with her. It had happened slowly, over the 3 years he had been stationed on Sentinel Station. At first, she had been just another alien dignitary, another politician he had to work with and protect. But then came the late nights spent discussing philosophy and history, the quiet walks through the station's gardens, where plants from 100 worlds grew under artificial suns, the moments when her mask of ancient wisdom would slip, and he would see the person underneath, lonely and tired and hungry for connection. He had told himself it was impossible. She was immortal, and he would be dust in another 50 years. She was a leader of worlds, and he was just a soldier. She saw time in, and he measured his life in days. There was no future for them, no happy ending waiting at the end of their story. But the heart does not listen to logic. The heart wants what it wants, and Daniel's heart wanted. He had never told her how he felt. He had never dared to speak the words out loud. But sometimes, in quiet moments when no one else was watching, he would catch her looking at him with something in her eyes that made him wonder, something that made him hope. Now, looking at her standing in the doorway with her advisors gathered behind her, he felt that hope flutter in his chest like a trapped bird. "The situation is bad, High Counselor," he said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "The fleet is larger than our intelligence suggested. We cannot hold them off with our current forces." Walked forward, her robes flowing around her like water. She stopped beside him at the viewport and looked out at the stars. "What do you recommend?" Daniel had been thinking about this for hours, running simulations in his head, searching for any path that did not end in disaster. There was only one option that gave the civilians a chance to survive. "We need to delay them," he said. "Buy time for the evacuation transports to reach the jump point. The human squadrons can deploy to the asteroid field near the fourth moon. It is rough terrain that will limit the effectiveness of their larger ships. Our pilots are trained for that kind of fighting. We can hold them there long enough for the civilians to escape." One of his advisors stepped forward. His name was, and he was old even by standards. His face was lined with age, and his eyes held the cold light of someone who had seen too much death. "You are proposing a suicide mission, Commander. Your pilots will not survive." "I know," Daniel replied simply, "but the alternative is letting them reach the station before the evacuation is complete. If that happens, everyone dies. Soldiers, civilians, children, everyone." His expression did not change. "And you believe your pilots will agree to this sacrifice?" Daniel thought of the men and women under his command. He thought of Porter with his nervous eyes and his dreams of becoming a captain someday. He thought of Lieutenant Maria Santos, who had pictures of her 3 children taped to the wall of her quarters. He thought of Ensign Tommy, who was supposed to get married next month to his childhood sweetheart back on Earth. "They will agree," he said quietly, "because that is what humans do. We stand between the darkness and those who cannot protect themselves, even when it costs us everything." Was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the stars. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Very well, Commander. You have my authorization. Deploy your squadrons." Daniel bowed his head in acknowledgement. "Thank you, High Counselor. I will begin preparations immediately." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Commander Hayes, I would speak with you privately." His heart stuttered in his chest. He nodded and followed her to a small room off the main command center. It was a conference room, with a long table and chairs designed for bodies. The door sealed behind them, cutting off the noise of the command center and leaving them alone in the silence. Stood with her back to him, her hands clasped in front of her. The light from the viewport painted her in shades of silver and shadow. She looked like a statue, beautiful and cold and impossibly distant. "You intend to lead this mission yourself," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "You will die." "Probably," Daniel shrugged, a gesture that felt strange and inadequate in the face of his own mortality. "But someone has to lead them. They need to see that their commander is willing to share their fate. It is the only way this works." Turned to face him, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that he did not recognize, something that looked almost like pain. You speak of death so casually, as if your life means nothing." "It does not mean nothing," Daniel replied. "But it means less than all the lives that will be saved if we succeed. That is simple math, High Counselor." "Simple math." She repeated the words like they tasted bitter in her mouth. "Is that all you are to yourself? A number in an equation, a variable to be sacrificed for the greater good?" Daniel was confused by the intensity in her voice. This was not the cold, distant counselor he was used to dealing with. This was something else, something raw and real that he had only glimpsed in their quietest moments together. "I am a soldier," he said carefully. "This is what soldiers do. We fight, we die, we protect those who cannot protect themselves. It is not complicated." Laughed, and the sound was sharp and hollow. "Not complicated, of course. How very human of you." Daniel frowned. There was an edge to her words that he did not understand, a cruelty that seemed to come from nowhere. "I am not sure what you mean, High Counselor." She moved toward him, and her eyes were no longer soft. They were hard and bright, like diamonds catching the light. "I mean that your species has always been like this, always rushing toward death, always so eager to throw yourselves into the fire. You act as if it makes you noble, as if your willingness to die somehow elevates you above the rest of us. But it does not. It just makes you foolish." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am tired of watching you humans parade your mortality around like it is some kind of virtue." Her voice was rising now, filled with a cold fury that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "I am tired of pretending that your short, flickering lives matter in the grand scheme of things. You have been in space for 200 years. My people have been traveling the stars for 10,000. You are children playing at being adults, and you have no idea how ridiculous you look." Daniel felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. 3 years of quiet moments and shared glances, 3 years of hopping that maybe, just maybe, he meant something to her. And now she was standing in front of him, tearing it all apart with words that cut deeper than any knife. "I thought," he began, then stopped. His throat felt tight and he had to force the words out. "I thought that we had something. I thought you understood me." His laugh was cold and cruel. "Understood you. I tolerated you, Commander. I found you amusing in the way one might find a clever pet amusing. Your species has a certain energy that can be entertaining in small doses. But you must understand that you will never be our equals. You are too primitive, too violent, too temporary. Whatever affection I may have shown was simply the kindness one extends to a lesser creature." Each word was like a hammer blow driving nails into his heart. Daniel stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. He had survived battles that had killed hundreds of his comrades. He had been shot, stabbed, burned, and left for dead. But nothing had ever hurt like this. Nothing had ever made him feel so small and worthless. "I see," he said finally, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Flat and empty, like all the life had been drained out of it. "Thank you for making your position clear, High Counselor." He reached up and began to remove his insignia. The pins came off easily, small pieces of metal that represented years of service and sacrifice. He set them on the table one by one. Then his medals, earned in battles that had taken the lives of friends and enemies alike. Then the ceremonial sash that marked him as a protector of, a symbol of the oath he had sworn to defend this world and its people. Watched him with an expression he could not read. "What are you doing?" "I am laying down my armor," he said, still removing the symbols of his rank and position. "Not the physical armor. That comes later. But the armor I built around my heart. The armor that made me believe I was fighting for something more than duty. The armor that made me believe someone on this world actually cared whether I lived or died." He pulled the last pin from his collar and set it on the table with the rest. Then he straightened and looked at her, really looked at her, for what he knew would be the last time. She was still beautiful. She would always be beautiful. But now he saw her clearly, saw the coldness that lived behind those ancient eyes. He had been a fool to think he could ever mean anything to her. He had been a fool to hope. "You want to know why humans rush toward death?" he asked, and his voice was quiet but steady. "It is not because we think it makes us noble. It is because we understand something your species has forgotten in all your of existence. We understand that life without love is not worth living. We understand that a single moment of genuine connection is worth more than an eternity of cold existence. We burn bright because we know our time is short, and we refuse to waste it on emptiness and cruelty." He turned toward the door. "Commander Hayes." Her voice stopped him, but he did not turn around. "The battle, my people need your tactical expertise." "Then they should have treated me like more than a clever pet," he replied. "Find someone else to die for you, High Counselor. I am done." He walked out of the room without looking back. The command center was busy with activity as officers prepared for the coming battle. They all stopped and stared as Daniel walked through, his uniform stripped of insignia, his face empty of expression. Porter called out to him, asking what was happening, but Daniel did not respond. He could not. If he opened his mouth, he was afraid of what might come out. Screams, maybe, or tears, or both. He walked to his quarters and sealed the door behind him. The room was small and spare, decorated with nothing but a few personal items he had collected over the years. A photograph of his parents, both dead now for a decade. A medal from his first battle, tarnished with age. A small plant in a ceramic pot, a gift from a friend who had died in the war against the... He sat down on his bed and stared at the wall. His mind was blank, empty of everything except a dull, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from his chest. He had given everything to this place. His time, his skills, his heart. And in return, he had received nothing but cruelty and contempt. For a long time he just sat there, letting the pain wash over him in waves. He did not cry. He did not rage. He just sat and felt the full weight of his loss pressing down on him like a physical force. Eventually, he stood up and began to pack. He did not have many belongings, just a few changes of clothes and some personal items. It all fit into a single bag, the sum total of his life outside the military. He looked around the room one last time, then walked out and closed the door behind him. The docking bay was crowded with evacuees, civilians from the station and the planet below who were desperately trying to board the transport ships. Families with children, elderly couples holding hands, young people who should have had their whole lives ahead of them. They all had the same look in their eyes, the same mixture of fear and hope that Daniel had seen on 1,000 faces in 12 war zones. He made his way through the crowd to the civilian transport area. An Alliance officer was checking identities at the boarding gate, making sure only authorized personnel were allowed on the ships. She looked up as Daniel approached, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Commander Hayes, sir, what are you doing here? Your squadron is supposed to be deploying in 2 hours." "I am no longer a commander," Daniel said. He handed her his identification card, the one that marked him as a civilian contractor rather than a military officer. "I would like to board one of the evacuation transports." The officer stared at him in confusion. "Sir, I do not understand. We need you out there. The tactical plans, the coordination with the other squadrons." "Someone else can handle it." Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless. "I am done fighting for people who see me as nothing more than a convenient tool." The officer opened her mouth to argue, but something in Daniel's eyes stopped her. She had seen that look before, in soldiers who had been pushed past their breaking point. She knew there was nothing she could say that would change his mind. "Very well, sir." She stamped his identification card and handed it back. "Transport 7 is boarding now. You should hurry." Daniel nodded and walked past her toward the waiting ship. Behind him, he could hear the officer speaking urgently into her communicator, reporting what had happened to whoever would listen. He did not care. Let them find someone else to die in his place. Let them learn what it felt like to be abandoned. The transport was a large ship designed to carry hundreds of passengers in relative comfort. Daniel found an empty seat near the back and sat down, his bag held in his lap. Around him, families were settling in, parents comforting children, couples holding each other close. They were all afraid, but they were not alone. They had each other. Daniel had no one. The ship shuddered as it lifted off from the docking bay. Through the viewport beside him, he could see the station growing smaller, its lights fading into the darkness of space. Somewhere on that station was probably wondering where he had gone, or maybe she did not care. Maybe she had already forgotten about him, moved on to more important things. The transport accelerated toward the jump point, leaving the station and the coming battle behind. Daniel leaned his head against the cold glass of the viewport and closed his eyes. He felt empty, hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside him and left nothing but a shell. He thought about his life, about all the choices that had led him to this moment. He had joined the military at 18, eager to explore the stars and make a difference in the universe. He had fought in wars and saved lives and lost friends. He had given everything he had to the cause, never asking for anything in return except the chance to keep fighting. And now it was over. Now he was just another refugee, running from a battle he had been supposed to lead. The irony was not lost on him. He had always been the one who stayed behind, who covered the retreat while others escaped. Now he was the one escaping, and someone else would have to stay behind and die. He wondered if the pilots in his squadron would understand. He wondered if they would hate him for abandoning them. He wondered if any of them would survive. The ship reached the jump point and prepared for the transition to hyperspace. Through the viewport, Daniel could see the distant flashes of weapons fire as the fleet engaged the station's defenses. The battle had begun, and he was not there. He was running away like a coward, like the lesser creature had named him. But he did not feel like a coward. He felt like someone who had finally woken up from a long dream. He felt like someone who had finally seen the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. He was not a hero. He was not a savior. He was just a man, a human being with a limited time in the universe. And he had spent too much of that time fighting for people who did not deserve his sacrifice. The ship jumped into hyperspace, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into long lines of light before disappearing entirely. Daniel watched them go, watched the last traces of vanish into the void. Goodbye, he thought. Goodbye to the station he had called home. Goodbye to the pilots who had trusted him with their lives. Goodbye, too, to the dream of love that had turned out to be nothing but a cruel joke. The ship traveled through hyperspace for 3 days. Daniel spent most of that time alone, eating little, sleeping less. He avoided the other passengers, not wanting to answer their questions or hear their stories. He just wanted to be left alone with his pain. On the second day, news came through about the battle. That had overwhelmed the station's defenses. The human squadrons had fought bravely, holding the line in the asteroid field for almost 6 hours before being destroyed. The station had fallen shortly after, but by then, most of the evacuation transports had escaped. Millions of lives had been saved. Daniel heard the news and felt nothing. Or maybe he felt too much and his mind had simply shut down to protect itself. He did not know anymore. He did not care. The transport arrived at a neutral space station called Haven Point, a massive structure that served as a waypoint for travelers and refugees. Daniel disembarked with the others, carrying his single bag and his burden of grief. He found a cheap room in the station's lower levels and sat down on the bed, staring at the wall. What now? The question echoed in his empty mind. What was he supposed to do now? He had no job, no purpose, no reason to get up in the morning. He had spent his entire adult life as a soldier, and now he was nothing. He thought about his options. He could find another ship, sign on as crew, and disappear into the vastness of space. He could go back to Earth, to the planet he had not seen in 15 years, and try to build a new life among his own people. He could drink himself into oblivion and wait for his heart to give out. None of those options seemed appealing. None of them seemed real. He was floating in a void, disconnected from everything that had once given his life meaning. Days passed. Daniel barely ate, barely slept. He spent most of his time sitting in his room, staring at the wall or out the viewport at the uncaring stars. Sometimes he cried, great heaving sobs that seemed to tear themselves out of his chest. Sometimes he raged, throwing things at the walls and screaming until his voice gave out. But mostly, he just sat in silence, feeling the weight of his loss pressing down on him like a physical force. On the 5th day, there was a knock at his door. Daniel ignored it at first, assuming it was just the station's maintenance crew or someone trying to sell him something. But the knocking continued, insistent and demanding. He got up slowly, his body stiff from days of inactivity. He opened the door to find a young woman standing in the hallway. She was human, with dark hair and bright green eyes that seemed to see right through him. She was wearing the uniform of the Alliance military, and her insignia marked her as a lieutenant. "Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes," she asked. "Just Daniel," he replied. "I am not a commander anymore." The woman nodded as if she had expected this answer. "My name is Lisa. I am with Alliance Intelligence. May I come in?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let her enter. The room was small and messy, but she did not seem to notice. She sat down in the only chair and looked up at him with those penetrating green eyes. "I know who you are," she said. "I know what happened on Sentinel Station. I know why you left." Daniel felt a flash of anger. "Then you know that I have nothing to say to the Alliance. I gave them 15 years of my life, and they treated me like I was expendable. I am done." Lisa shook her head. "I am not here to recruit you back into the military. I am here because I need your help." "My help?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "I could not even help myself. What makes you think I can help anyone else?" "Because you are the only one who can." Lisa leaned forward, her expression intense. "6 months ago, we discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about the. They are not just conquerors, Commander. They are running from something. Something that destroyed their home world and is now hunting them across the galaxy. And it is heading straight for Alliance space." Daniel stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. Running from something. They have the largest fleet in the known galaxy. What could possibly make them run? "We do not know," Lisa admitted. "Our intelligence is limited, but we do know that whatever it is more powerful than anything we have ever encountered. If it reaches Alliance space, everything we have built will be destroyed. Humans, all of it, gone." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We need someone to lead a mission into territory," she continued. "Someone who knows how to fight, how to survive, how to adapt to changing circumstances. Someone who is not afraid to die, but who is smart enough to stay alive. We need you, Daniel." Daniel sat down on the bed, his head spinning. Part of him wanted to refuse, to tell her to find someone else to save the galaxy. He had already given everything he had. He had nothing left to give. But another part of him, a part he had thought was dead, stirred in his chest. It was the part of him that had always wanted to make a difference, the part that could not stand by while innocent people suffered. It was the part of him that was still, despite everything, human. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "There are plenty of other commanders, other soldiers. Why come to me?" Lisa smiled sadly. "Because you are the only one who understands what we are really fighting for. You are not fighting for glory or advancement or political power. You are fighting for the people who cannot fight for themselves. That is what we need right now. That is what the galaxy needs." Daniel was silent for a long moment, weighing her words. He thought about in her cruel dismissal, about the pilots who had died in the battle he had abandoned, about all the pain and loss he had suffered. Did he really have anything left to give? But then he thought about the families on the transport, the parents and children who had been saved because someone had stayed behind to fight. He thought about the billions of people living in Alliance space, going about their daily lives, unaware of the darkness that was coming for them. They deserved a chance. They deserved someone who would fight for them, even when all hope seemed lost. "All right," he said finally, "tell me what you need me to do." Lisa's smile widened, and for the first time Daniel saw hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Commander. I know this is not easy, but I promise you it will be worth it." She stood up and walked to the door, then paused and looked back at him. "One more thing. There are others who have been hurt by the Alliance, by the older species who look down on us. People who have been cast aside, abandoned, forgotten. They are waiting for someone to lead them. Will you be that leader?" Daniel thought about her question. He thought about all the humans who had suffered the same treatment he had, who had been told they were not good enough, not worthy, not equal. They deserved better. They deserved someone who understood their pain and could turn it into something powerful. "Yes," he said, "I will lead them." Lisa nodded, satisfied. "Then welcome to the fight, Commander Hayes. We have a lot of work to do." She left and Daniel stood alone in his small room, looking out at the stars. For the first time in days, he felt something other than pain. He felt purpose. He felt hope. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if he would survive the mission or if it would even make a difference. But he knew one thing for certain. He was done being a victim. He was done letting others define his worth. He was going to stand up and fight, not for the Alliance, but for all the people who had been told they were not good enough. He was going to prove them wrong. Daniel picked up his bag and walked out of the room, heading toward whatever fate awaited him. The stars burned cold and distant outside the viewport, but for the first time, they did not look empty. They looked like a challenge. And Daniel Hayes had never been one to back down from a challenge. He made his way through the crowded corridors of Haven Point, weaving between aliens of a dozen different species. Most of them did not give him a second glance. He was just another human, another brief flicker of life in a universe full of ancient and powerful beings. But some of them looked at him with something like curiosity, as if they sensed that there was more to him than met the eye. Lisa was waiting for him at the docking bay, standing beside a small ship that looked fast and dangerous. She handed him a data pad containing the details of the mission, and Daniel scanned through it quickly, his tactical mind already working on strategies and contingencies. "The ship is called the Silent Runner," Lisa said. "It is designed for stealth operations behind enemy lines. You will have a crew of 12, all volunteers who know the risks." Daniel nodded, still reading. "And the target?" "A research station on the edge of their territory. Our intelligence suggests they have been studying whatever is hunting them. If we can get our hands on that research, we might be able to find a way to stop it." It was a long shot, Daniel knew, but long shots were all they had left. He looked up from the data pad and met Lisa's eyes. "You know this is probably a one-way trip." "I know." Her voice was steady, but he could see the fear hiding behind her professional mask. "But it is a chance, and right now that is more than we have." Daniel thought about her words. He thought about all the chances he had taken in his life, all the risks that had paid off and all the ones that had not. He thought about the people who had died under his command and the people who had lived because of his decisions. He thought about, and the love he had thought they shared. She had called him a clever pet, a lesser creature who could never be her equal. She had broken his heart with a few cruel words and walked away without a second thought. But she had been wrong about him. She had been wrong about all of humanity. They were not lesser creatures. They were not children playing at being adults. They were survivors, fighters, dreamers who refused to give up even when all hope seemed lost. And Daniel was going to prove it. "Let us go," he said, and walked toward the ship. The Silent Runner was small but well-equipped, with a cramped bridge, a tiny common area and berths for the crew. Daniel met the other members of the team as they prepared for departure. There was Porter, the young ensign from Sentinel Station who had somehow survived the battle and volunteered for the mission. There was Maria Santos, the lieutenant with 3 children waiting for her back on Earth. There was Tommy, who had postponed his wedding to join the crew. There were 9 others, all human, all with stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or abandoned by the Alliance and the older species. They gathered in the common area as the ship prepared to launch, and Daniel stood before them, looking at their faces. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw determination. He saw the same fire that burned in his own heart. "You all know why we are here," he said. "You all know the risks. This mission is probably going to kill us, but it is also going to save billions of lives. It is going to prove that humans are not the lesser creatures they think we are. It is going to show the entire galaxy what we are capable of." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am not going to lie to you. The odds are against us. The enemy is powerful and we are few, but we have something they do not have. We have each other. We have the bonds that form when people fight side by side, bleed together, and refuse to give up. We have the strength that comes from knowing that our lives, however brief, matter." He looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes and seeing the hope that flickered there. "So let us go out there and show them what humans can do. Let us make them remember our names. And if we have to die, let us die as heroes, not as victims." The crew cheered, and Daniel felt something warm spread through his chest. It was not love, not the kind he had felt for, but it was something close. It was connection. It was belonging. It was the knowledge that he was not alone. The silent runner launched from Haven Point and headed toward the edge of known space. Behind them, the stars burned cold and distant. Ahead of them lay danger, uncertainty, and the slim chance of survival. But Daniel Hayes was not afraid. He had already lost everything that mattered to him. He had already been broken and cast aside, and he had discovered something important in the wreckage of his heart. He had discovered that humans do not stay broken. They rebuild, they adapt, they grow stronger, and when someone tries to tear them down, they rise up and prove their worth. Had called him a lesser creature. She had dismissed him with cruel words and watched him walk away. But she did not know what she had done. She did not know that her cruelty had set something free inside him, something that had been waiting for a reason to emerge. Daniel Hayes was no longer fighting for the Alliance. He was no longer fighting for he was fighting for himself, for his crew, for all the humans who had ever been told they were not good enough. And he was going to make the galaxy remember his name. The stars stretched out before him, infinite and full of possibility. The darkness was coming, but Daniel was ready to meet it. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Let them come," he thought. "Let them all come. They will learn what humans are made of." And the silent runner flew on, toward destiny, toward danger, toward hope. The story was just beginning.